Welcome to episode 9 of season 3 of Read by the Author. Tonight I am continuing the reading of Time Anomaly with chapter 21 of the book. So let's get back into the story. 21. Sand and Stone. Katerina, my dearest daughter, I know what you must think of me, but I had to do it, and I had to run. To leave you behind, for now. I'm doing this for you, for us. There is a group who can help free you. You'll be able to be your own person, free to make your own choices instead of being a slave to Nezharet hierarchy. The Council of Seven will not be in charge forever. A revolution is coming. I only wish I had caught wind of it before you were forced to manifest. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you this eternal pain. So you see, I had to accept this task. I had to do what must be done to protect us once the revolution happens. By harming the Meswet's sister and getting rid of Set's unborn offspring, I'm proving that my loyalty doesn't lie with Set or with the Council, that I'm trustworthy and capable, and that I would be a worthy member of the opposition. I'll send for you as soon as I know it's safe for you to join us. It's possible that you will be required to prove where your loyalty lies as well before you'll be able to join me, but I know you'll do the right thing. I'll keep you updated. Destroy this letter and do not, under any circumstances, tell anyone about what I've told you. If the wrong people find out, we're both dead. Remember, it's always been you and me, Kat, and it will always be you and me. I love you, sweetheart. I'll see you soon. Love, Mom. Kat? Dom knocked on the bathroom door. Are you all right? Are you sick? I'm fine, I said weakly. Just a little overwhelmed, that's all. I stared at the single crinkled piece of paper I'd found balled up and stuffed into one of my sneakers when I'd been repacking my duffel bag, watching it shake in my grasp. Something was crushing my chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. She was delusional. My mom was delusional. These were my people, my family, and she wanted me to betray them? To help some group of crazy people start a revolution and overthrow the council? But she was still my mom. I tore the letter into tiny pieces and dropped it in the toilet, flushing without hesitation. I wouldn't betray Marcus and Lex and the others, but I wouldn't betray my mom either. After taking a deep, steadying breath, then another, I opened the bathroom door. Dominic was leaning against the side of the wardrobe, only a few steps away. His arms crossed over his chest and his eyebrows drawn together. His expression smoothed as I emerged. Are you all right? I nodded. His eyes scanned my face almost like he was searching for something. He frowned. A set came by while you were in the bathroom. They are ready to depart. I glanced at the bed where Jenny lay, sedated and unconscious, but healthy enough. Do I have time to say goodbye? Dom nodded and moved across the room toward the foot of the bed. I followed, moving around the side to sit in the chair I had been using for the past few hours. Do you think she'll be able to hear me? I asked, taking hold of her cool hand. Dom shrugged. Perhaps, perhaps not, but there is no harm in believing it. Swallowing roughly, I stared at him. You'll keep her safe? I swear it, he said, with the slightest bow of his head. Okay, good. That's good, because not much terrified me more than the thought of my mom returning to finish what she had started. I gave Jenny's hand a squeeze and leaned in closer to whisper my goodbyes. It's so sandy, I said, staring out the passenger window of the Jeep I was sharing with a Nezharet named Carson. Dom, Neffy, and Alexander had remained back in Cairo, giving Jenny time to recover and regain her strength while also waiting for Alexa's parents and Grandma. They wouldn't be arriving for another week, so I had been handed off to someone else for the trip west into the Sahara. Carson laughed. It was a low, gentle sound, a soothing sound. I decided I liked his laugh. I just wished I felt like laughing too. Your first time out in the Red Land? I glanced at him, frowning. Huh? Carson smiled at me, risking looking away from the caravan of other jeeps stretching out ahead of us. It wasn't like he was going to veer off the road or anything. There was no road, just an endless sea of sand, so it wasn't really that risky. And I was glad he did it, because when Carson smiled, he was ridiculously hot. Like superstar hot. Like A-list actor heartthrob hot. Hot. It was a nice distraction when thoughts of my mom threatened to consume me. Carson's eyes were a deep blue. I just wanted to swim in them, and his hair was brown and tousled, like maybe he just got out of bed, or maybe he'd spent 15 minutes arranging it just so. I sighed. Maybe I would never know, but I'd sure like to. His smile became lopsided, and he returned his eyes to the dune we were cresting. The Red Land is what the ancients called the desert. You've never been out here, huh? Unlike most Negerettes, Carson spoke like a real person, not like he'd just walked out of some period movie. I decided I liked that about him too. Once again, I looked out my window and sighed. It's not like I've got a shot with him anyway. Not now that I'm the psycho trader woman's daughter. Nope, never been out in the desert before, never been to Egypt before, never been out of Seattle before, never had a wanted mom before. I snapped my mouth shut and glanced at him. Why did I have to say that last part? Carson met my eyes for the briefest moment. Seattle, huh? Cool place. I spent the last few years there myself. I perked up a little in my seat, grateful he'd ignored the whole wanted mom slip-up. Really? He nodded slowly. Where? I lived in the U District, in a house with some guys. Negerettes? Yep. Were you going to school? I asked, hopeful. If he had been, then it was likely he wasn't really that much older than me, which would be awesome. Sort of. He flashed me his killer smile again. I was stationed there to watch Lex. I slumped a little in my seat. Oh, did you, go to school somewhere else before that? Oxford a few years back. I bit my lip, my hopes plummeting. And before that? Oxford was my first, and was just undergrad. Marcus stationed me and the other guys at UW because we were actually interested in grad school. Me specifically, because I was able to get into the archaeology program. My eyebrows rose, and I looked at him. So you worked with Lex? You didn't just watch her? Yep. A small smile touched his lips. We're friends, actually. His smile widened and he shook his head, laughing softly. The last time I saw her, she'd won a bet on who'd get published first. I had to give her $100. So she knows you're a Negerette? Carson shook his head, his brow creased. She's big on trust, you know, on not lying, since everyone pretty much lied to her forever. Taking a deep breath, he flicked his eyes my way. I know, which is why I asked to be stationed down in Edfu, so she wouldn't have to cross paths with me and feel even more betrayed, especially after what happened at the trial with her friend Kara. He shook his head. Did you hear about all that? I snorted. Are you kidding me? I watched it on the news. I gritted my teeth. I hope someone cuts off that Mike guy's balls. Carson let out a breathy laugh. You and me both, sister. You and me both. At the word sister, my stomach twisted. Wait, you don't mean that literally, do you? I'm pretty sure I do. Mike looks like he could stand to lose a ball or two. I laughed. I almost couldn't believe it, but I really laughed. No, you geek. The sister thing. So that's not your... My dear old dad? He shook his head. Nah, my dad was a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson of Marcus's. Was? He nodded. He was gone before I was even born. my fingers clenched around the seatbelt crossing my shoulder. Was it set? In a way. His hold on the steering wheel tightened, making a creaking noise. Listen, about your mom. Here we go. I understand what it's like to feel betrayed by your parents. I stared at him. You do? I do. He met my eyes, then looked ahead. I really do. After a moment's pause, he said, just remember that you aren't your mom. You're you. She made a choice for herself, not for you. So don't feel like you have to punish yourself or, I don't know, feel like it's inevitable that you'll follow in her footsteps. Just be your own person. Make your own choices. Make your own choices. Be your own person. I smiled, really liking the sound of that. I took the oath the day before yesterday. Carson's hands tightened on the steering wheel again. Oaths are important, he said, his voice flat, almost distant. A few words can change your life forever. Yeah, I said, returning my gaze to the endless expanse of sandy dunes and feeling a little less lost than I had been feeling a few minutes earlier. They really can. We reached the oasis late that afternoon, and everyone hopped out of their jeeps and hustled around, setting up a city of tents that reminded me of the one I'd lived in for months during the excavation. It sort of felt like coming home, especially the part where everything was sand or rough limestone and just so blah. I thought an oasis was supposed to be like green and lush and stuff. Carson looked around, frowning thoughtfully as we hauled a heavy-duty chest of I don't know what from one of the jeeps and started carrying it toward the center of the camp. Legend goes, he said in a woo-woo ghost story voice. It was this crazy crystal city in the middle of the desert, surrounded by enormous walls of limestone. But because it was linked to Nguyen's Ba, when he died, the walls collapsed in on the city, and the desert reclaimed it. I gave him a sideways glance. And Tom says I watch too many movies. Chuckling, Carson shrugged. I didn't make up the legend. He squinted conspiratorially. You could always ask one of the ancients for the truth. I've heard some people say that Marcus was even there when Nguyen died, like by his side. My eyes widened. Really? Carson shrugged again. I don't know. That's just what I heard. Brow furrowing, I considered his words. Marcus wouldn't tell me anything, I knew that. But if Aset really was his twin sister, then she was just as old as him. I wonder if she was there back then, too. My mouth fell open as I considered another, much more chilling possibility. What if Lex was here, is here, back then? Tiny, invisible ghost spiders were suddenly crawling all over me. Part 4. Sahara Desert, Lower Egypt, 6th Dynasty, Old Kingdom. 22. Compare and contrast. Do you have any idea how much I love you? Heru said in a barely intelligible English accent. It had the sound of something memorized by rote. I grabbed his wrist and stared at him as we continued to walk along an ambling line of donkeys packed with the belongings and traveling supplies of nearly 24 people. What did you just say? Heru met my eyes for a moment, curiosity filling his. Do you have any idea how much I love you? He switched back to the only language we shared, the original tongue. That is what you said to me yesterday, after regaining consciousness, is it not? Yes. How he'd remembered the sounds almost perfectly when he had no idea what they meant was beyond me. I returned my outward attention to the way ahead, a seemingly endless sea of sand with more swells than I could count without going cross-eyed. Inside, I was completely focused on a single thought. Please don't ask me what those words mean. What does it mean? I rearranged the white linen wrap draped over my head and around my shoulders. The hood blocked the unrelenting glare fairly well, and the matching robe hung nearly to my ankles, just long enough to protect most of my body from the direct sunlight without me constantly tripping over the hem. Heru, along with all of the other Nezarettes and humans, was wearing a nearly identical garment. I shifted the purring little furnace that was Russ, curled up in his linen sling, to the left side of my body and stared at the sand a few steps ahead. I would rather not tell you. Heru bumped my shoulder with his arm. Why not, little queen? I didn't need to catch a glimpse of his face to know that he was smiling. Are you so ashamed of your feelings for the Great Father? Which cut right to the heart of the issue. He thought I had mistaken him for Nuin in my delirium. I hadn't. Something like that, I mumbled. So how far is it to this Netjerat oasis? We were heading into the Sahara on the west side of the Nile, and based on the sun's midday location, I could tell we were heading in a generally west to slightly southwesterly direction. Heru chuckled. Very well. I shall let the matter go. We should arrive at the oasis in just over a week. And an ancient Egyptian week was 10 days, so closer to 2 weeks to me. I was not looking forward to 10 days of trekking through and camping in the unrelenting desert. Are we absolutely certain we won't run out of water and die of dehydration and have our dried up husks uncovered by humans in thousands of years? Laughing out loud, Heru assured me of our safety. We've traveled this route hundreds of times. After all, the Netjerat oasis is our home. Wherever else we go, we always return there. Not in my time. I'd never heard of this secret oasis that was apparently the ancient Nezaret headquarters, and I was not only bonded to a member of the Council of Seven and the great-granddaughter of the leader of the council, but I was the Meswet, the prophesied savior of our people, and an honorary member of the council. That alone had made me a leader in my own right, whether I'd wanted to be one or not. It just seemed so odd that I hadn't heard anything about the Netjerat oasis before traveling back 4 millennia. I heaved a deep, resigned sigh. I doubted I would ever catch up on Nezaret trivia, though living out our people's past was turning out to be a good start. What troubles you now, little queen? Our past, our future, you? I wish you would not call me that. Would you prefer big queen? No, I laughed. I cannot say that I would. Ah, then you shall forever be little queen to me. Blushing for the lamest reason, Heru gave me a nickname. Yippee! I cleared my throat. Why are we returning to the oasis right now? Is it because of what we saw at the market? How bad things are getting with the drought? In a way, it is many things. Pepi's death, the droughts and famine, Kessie's inability to help the land any further by continuing to rule the mortals, and the increasing power the Nomarchs are gaining. Mention of the Nomarchs piqued my interest. They were the regional governors of ancient Egypt's 20-plus different nomes, or territories. Yet another theory in my time claimed that the slow transfer of power from the pharaoh to the regional leaders during Pepi II's reign was what had led to the demise of the Old Kingdom. A shift of power on top of droughts and famine sounded like a perfect recipe for revolution to me. Has there been much unrest? We thought... I shook my head, rephrasing what I had been about to say. We thought the downfall of the 6th dynasty was caused by... was hardly an appropriate way to talk to someone who was currently living in the 6th dynasty. In my homeland, we heard rumors of rebellions and regional leaders gaining power, but we were unsure how much truth there was to those rumors. You heard correctly. Heru's linen cowl flapped as he shook his head. Had Kessie taken care of this latest Pepi as she was supposed to, this all might have been a little more manageable, but... But what? What do you mean, taken care of? He lived until he was in his 90s. I shrugged. That seems pretty taken care of to me. She led him on too well, and he loved her too much. Heru laughed, but it was a bitter sound. He refused to lay with any of his other wives, and for whatever reason, Kessie manipulated the Aat, hiding for some 70 years the fact that none of the few children born to his wives had been fathered by him. Possibly because she fed on his adoration for her. She should have told us of his refusal and sent him on to the next life so a ruler with the will to produce an heir could be appointed. But he took a deep breath, exhaling a tired sigh. She did not, and Peppy spent the last 25 years of his life more or less an invalid, with Kessie ruling in his stead. And now, not one of the bastard children born to his wives survives. He shook his head slowly. I still do not understand why she would do such a thing, risk the people of this land so recklessly. He shook his head. Nguyen was not pleased, as you can imagine, but she is his daughter, and he has long favored her. I think she was afraid, I said, hoping my words were quiet enough that the woman in question wouldn't overhear me. I was pretty sure she was somewhere up ahead, but with the desert cowls, everyone looked alike from the back. Catching my reluctance to speak at a full volume, Heru moved closer and leaned down so his head was nearer to mine. Please explain what you mean, he said softly. I hesitated, unsure how open I could really be with Heru regarding Ankes and Pepi. She seems like a woman who would do anything for power, and I would bet that losing power is her greatest fear, along with the reason she dislikes me so much. Heru made a rough noise low in his throat. That and her misperception of our relationship. Right. But I think you may be correct, he said. She is devious and conniving, and would likely trade anything short of her life to be in your position, the Netjarat queen. Even as Nguyen's eldest daughter, she has never been considered such. I was shaking my head in disbelief, and the words were out before I even knew what I was saying. If you think so poorly of her, then why do you... I snapped, my mouth shut. Why do I... Nothing. I stared at the rear end of one of the donkeys up ahead. Forget I said anything. If that is what you truly desire. I was standing in a shallow valley of sand, surrounded on all sides by rounded dunes. The sky overhead was red and orange, and I thought this might be what it would be like to stand on the surface of Mars. Heru and I had both stripped off our desert cowls once the sun set, starting its nightly trip through the underworld, and now stood barefoot in the sand, facing each other. Heru was wearing nothing but his usual linen kilt, and I had on a decidedly thin slip of a dress. The yellows, oranges, and reds bleeding across the sky set Heru's skin aglow and his golden irises ablaze. He was stunning, and more than a little distracting with all of that skin and muscle and... Hit me, Heru said. What? My eyes widened, and I took a step backward. No! Heru exhaled heavily, a sound that could be mistaken for nothing other than annoyance. Hit me. I shook my head. I will not. I might hurt you. I fully understood that Heru training me to be less of a defenseless wimp would require me to actually practice defending myself against other people, him for starters, but I just couldn't bring myself to actually hit him. Heru laughed, the sound low and velvety. Trust me, you could not possibly hurt me. Taking a step closer, I gave him a chummy punch on the shoulder. It was pathetic. Even more so because it wasn't like I was incapable of hitting him. I'd done it before, once. I had slapped him, but I'd been seething with anger. And damn it, he had deserved it. He had abandoned me in a compound filled with Nezharettes during the scariest, most confusing time of my life. Other than now, which was decidedly scarier and more confusing. But this wasn't Heru's fault. I had no desire to hit him. You stare harder than you hit, he said, settling a level gaze on me. You stare harder than you hit, I repeated in a snotty, sing-song voice. I do not want to hurt you. I held up a hand, stopping him before he could reiterate how impossible it was for me to hurt his mightiness. Regardless of whether I even could, why would I try if I had no desire to cause you pain? Heru studied me, pursing his lips the faintest amount and narrowing his eyes. The protracted moment of silence started to grow uncomfortable, and he crossed his arms. If I asked Kessie to hit me, she would do it. Could do it. Jealousy and rage flared to life, intense and uncontrollable. I acted on pure instinct. Clenching my jaw, I pulled my arm back and swung. My palm struck the side of his chiseled face with a smack, stinging instantly. "Ow!" I said, shaking out my hand. Heru was grinning, his eyes shining. "It would seem that you found sufficient motivation to want to hurt me." I mirrored him, crossing my arms over my chest, and started digging the toes of one bared foot into the sand. "If I promise to try to beat you senseless, will you promise to never compare me to her again?" "So, I would not be allowed to say that she is shorter than you?" I smiled, just a little. "Heru." "Or that her feet are much more masculine than yours?" I couldn't help but laugh. I relaxed my arms at my sides. "You're making fun of me." "Clearly those comparisons are not driving you to fulfill your promise to try to beat me senseless." He grinned wickedly. "Until you show me that you intend to fulfill your side of the bargain, I see no need to fulfill mine." He tilted his head downward, tucking his chin closer to his neck and watching me with a dangerous glint in his eyes. "The curve of Kessie's hips is enough to make a man—" "Stop, Heru," I said, my voice low and even. "Want to take hold of her and—" "Be quiet!" I shouted, slapping my hands over my ears. The dangerous glint in his eyes intensified. "Make me." I shivered, partially from the rapidly cooling evening air, and partially from the challenge issued by every inch of his body. Glaring, I stepped closer, stopping when I was only inches away from him and had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. He raised one eyebrow. "As intimidating as your very presence is." Staring into those golden pools, I slammed the heels of my hands into his abdomen. I skittered away as he doubled over, momentarily breathless, then lunged at him, leaping onto his back, wrapping my legs around his middle and hooking my feet together. I snaked my right arm around his neck, squeezing in what I hoped was an effective chokehold, not that I had any clue how such a thing was actually done, and brought my lips to his ear. How am I doing? Apparently not that well, because Heru straightened and peeled my arm away from his neck with little effort. Luckily, my other arm was hooked over his shoulder, my fingers clutching one very well-formed pectoral, so I managed to stay on his back. Besides, I wasn't going anywhere with the death grip my legs had around his hips. In fact, I only had to scoot a few inches lower for my heels to dig into his— "You would not dare," Heru said between heavy breaths, and I gave myself a mental pat on the back for making him breathe so hard. "I would not?" I continued my slow slide down his body. Heru dropped to his knees and leaned back until I was sandwiched between him and the hot sand. The weight of him was enough to steal my breath, and I was certain he wasn't even trying to hurt me. If he had been, he would have slammed me backward into the sand while he had still been standing rather than slowly lowering us to the ground. No, he just really didn't want me shoving my heel into his tender man parts. I unhooked my feet and slapped his chest with both hands. "You win." Heru rolled off me and crouched on his knees beside me, helping me up to a sitting position while I coughed and gasped for air. He even tugged down the skirt of my shift for me. "I believe we have come to an agreement," he said, meeting my eyes. "If you continue to show that much enthusiasm while I am training you to defend yourself, I will refrain from even mentioning her." "Deal." I held out my hand to shake on it. When he didn't show any sign of extending his own, I grabbed his wrist and guided his hand to mine. Gripping his tightly, I shook for both of us. Heru looked down at our joined hands, then met my eyes, his expression bewildered. "It's a custom from my land. We shake hands when we have come to an agreement." Heru's smile was slow to come, but it grew to something radiant. He tightened his grip and shook back. "We have an agreement," he said with a nod. His smile faltered. "How long is this custom supposed to go on?" I laughed. "Only a few seconds." "Ah, I see." He stood, easily pulling me up to stand in front of him. "And now, little queen, I will teach you how to focus your excessive enthusiasm so you may have a chance of hurting me." Thank you for listening. That is it for this episode of Read by the Author, but I will be back next week with some more of the story. Until then, happy reading.